Do you know Illustrator? If so, you may know that for many years now, the program has allowed you to project type and other objects into a rough approximation of 3D space, complete with beveled edges. Well, nowadays, that approximation is not so rough. In fact, I'd go so far as to call it exceedingly smooth. Welcome, if you will, to a new dimension in illustration and design. I'm going to start with a very basic introduction to the 3D panel inside Illustrator 2022 and moving forward. If you're working with an older version of the software, the stuff isn't going to work the same. However, I encourage you to keep watching because it's so good. In fact, we're going to be creating this thing right here. Isn't it
divine?
And I'm going to start with just some plain editable point type. Now, you can start with whatever you like. You can start with a rectangle and turn it into a cube. How cool is that? Try it out, in fact. However, I'm assuming most of you at some point in your lives are going to want to create 3D type. And so here goes. Just click on a type to select it. At least that's what I'm doing with the black arrow tool, which Illustrator calls the selection tool. I call it the black arrow because, after all, it is one. And this is going to be pretty darn important in just a moment. All right, the next thing you want to do, two different ways to create 3D type inside Illustrator. I'm showing them both to you because you need to know them, and I'll show you why. I'll go to the window menu. This is method number 1, and choose 3D and materials. Now, my panel is nice and tall. Yours might be shorter, like so that you have to scroll down and up, which is tedious, of course. In which case, just go ahead and grab the bottom of the panel and drag it down so that you can see all of the options. And now all you have to do is click on extrude, and you have some extruded type. How easy is that? What do you need me for? Well, here's the thing. That icon right there can be dimmed. Why? I have no idea. Just sometimes it is. In which case, here's what you do. I'll just go ahead and undo that change, and I'll even hide the panel because I want you to see what happens when you go to the effect menu. Method number 2, it's your backup method. Choose 3D and materials and choose extrude and bevel. Also, by the way, notice down here at the bottom, 3D Classic, which also includes extrude and bevel classic. Classic is the wrong word. It should say legacy because classic implies that it might be better in the old days. It ain't. It's not as good. However, these commands are here to indicate, if nothing more, that if you've created 3D effects inside Illustrator in the past, why then Illustrator 2022 and moving forward is backward compatible. All right, so that's not how you want to work these days, though. You want to choose this first command right here, which is not only going to bring up the 3D and materials panel, but it's also going to select the extrude option. So it's doing two things in one operation. Now, I want to call your attention to the central widget right here. Can you see it if you're working along with me? How can you work along with me? You're supposed to be watching what I'm doing, but in any event, that's only going to appear if the black arrow tool is active. If I switch to the white arrow tool, aka direct selection tool, it disappears. Notice that. That's too bad. And the same is true if you switch to the pen tool or any of these other tools, by the way. In which case, if you're missing your widget because you want your widget, then switch back to the black arrow tool, which you can also get by pressing the V key, which looks like a down pointing arrowhead. Well, you know, that's the rationale anyway. So here's the widget right there in all of its glory. It's got 4 different modes. So notice if I hover over rotate around X, the horizontal bar right there, that is going to move the letters forward and backward like so. If you're looking for a vocab word, this is the pitch, by the way. We also have a heads-up display that's showing me X -48 in my case, so you may find that helpful. Next, we have rotate around Y, which starts off as the vertical axis. What did I just do there? How in the world did I lose my widget and create this big blinking insertion marker? That's because I double-clicked, by the way, and I automatically switched to the type tool just in case, you know, you run into these kind of errors. Just press the escape key and you're back in business. Now I'll go ahead and rotate around Y, and notice that slings the letters back and forth right here. This is what's known, again, for you vocabulary lovers, as yaw, Y-A-W. So Y for yaw. And then we've got one more axis because after all, axis that is, because after all, this is 3D space, so we need 3 axes, plural, X, Y, and Z. If you hover over the circle, you're going to see rotate around Z. You're also going to see a rotate cursor and a little arrowhead just to the left of my cursor at the end of that circle. That's very important. I'll show you what happens if you don't work that way. But notice now I can roll. This is called a roll, by the way. I'm rolling the text around. Now, if you drag too close to the center, you're going to create some very alarming movements there, in which case, move your cursor out like so, and then you have a lot more control. All right, still heads up displayed, Z -1, 21, that is, whatever really that means. In any event, here's what can go wrong. If you move your cursor just a little bit off that circle, notice it turns into a black arrow, just a few pixels away. And this is going to happen to you, I guarantee you. Unless you never make mistakes in your whole life, in which case, awesome. But what'll happen is if you drag at this point, you'll just move the text around, which can be a little disconcerting. Just undo, and remember my advice. Just go ahead and drag there on that circle and move your cursor far away for more control. All right, next, this is the fourth way to work, and this is for those of you who are feeling very brave, kind of daredevil brave. Move your cursor into the center right there. You'll see rotate freeform. And if you drag, you're going to rotate around all three axes at the same time, which may seem very expedient, but bear in mind that you're working in 3D space on a 2D plane inside Illustrator. So it's like, it's a little hard to predict, frankly. I actually am pleased with what I'm seeing right here. This is good. But you may prefer to just, operate on one axis at a time. All right, I just want you to see something. This is just info from me to you, how to possibly think about pitch, yaw, and roll. So rotating around the x-axis is pitch. Y is yaw. That's pretty easy, I guess, assuming you remember the word yaw exists. And then Z is roll. It all comes from the world of aircraft technology, which pretty much defined the 20th century, but is, still useful stuff. I mean, how many people get to say, I know how to fly? Which will be you in about 30 seconds. And so, quick lesson, the elevators pitched the nose of the plane upward. That won't be on the quiz because there is no quiz, but that's pitch. Use the rudder to yaw or steer the plane in a different direction. And use the ailerons, which move in opposite directions, by the way, to bank the plane. None of these are part of a car, and only the rudder is part of a boat, but it's all part of navigating 3D space. And so I just want to review. I'm going to go ahead and hide the 3D panel for a moment so that you can see that rise or fall is pitch. And so you pitch backward to point the face of the object up, or forward to point it down. Yaw is turning the letters or spinning them, if you prefer. And then the roll is the bank around the Z-axis, that big loop-de-loop that we saw with our 3D type. So, just in case you want to sound really smart in front of your friends and colleagues, or in front of your competitors and much-hated enemies for all that. All right, I'm going to switch back to where we were, and I need to bring back that panel, so I'll just go to the window menu and choose 3D and materials. And now notice depth right here. You can increase the depth value to add more extrusion to your type. However, I'm going to take it down because I want to show you something here. I'll take it so that it's pretty thin. Well, 50, that's actually the default. Notice cap right here. We've got cap on right there, turn cap on, and turn cap off. I don't know if cap's the best way to understand this. It's face, really. It's the face of the letters. So that fill right there. If you turn that fill off, the face off, you're going to turn the front and back face off. And so you're going to be able to see through the letters, and you'll just see the extrusion and nothing more. That is a way to work if you like. However, what you can't do in this case is control the thickness of the stroke around the letters because we have no stroke. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to turn cap on to bring back my faces, the front face and the back face, by the way. And then notice that my fill is yellowish and I don't have any stroke. I'm going to swap them by going down to the bottom of the toolbox and clicking on this little swap icon right there. Or you can press the keyboard shortcut Shift X for those of you who love shortcuts, as I do, by the way, because they're short and they cut through things. All right, I'm going to change the line weight to 10 points so that we have a nice thick stroke. And now we can see the extrusion as before. We have no faces because we have no fill. And we also just, have a thickness to work with. But I want to show you this. What happens if you combine a stroke with no face, with no cap right there, turn cap off, then you're going to see through the stroke as well. Now we have a double extrusion effect going. And now notice what happens if I really reduce that depth value, not too far because I'll just lose it. But let's say a little less than that, a little more than that. I'll just nudge that value up a little bit. So you can see that we have a kind of emboss effect. That's cool, right? You might find that helpful. I might too, but not for this effect that I'm going for. So I'm going to turn the caps back on, the faces that is. I'm going to go with a higher depth value for now. And I'm going to add a fill by clicking on this first swatch on the far left side of the control panel up here in the top left corner of the screen. And I'm just going to change it to the shade of blue. You can do anything you want, but I want you to see something. I'm going to change the line weight value right here to 30 points, like so that the strokes are nice and thick. Doesn't that look good? Here's the thing, though. I want you to see this. If I turn off the fill for a moment, we have big, huge, chunky strokes. We're seeing the stroke going out and the stroke going in. So both halves of that 30-point stroke, that is. However, if I turn on the fill appears in front of the stroke, which is not the way things normally work when you're filling and stroking type inside Illustrator. However, it is the way things work when you're working with 3D type inside the program. And that, my friends, is my very basic introduction to the new and improved 3D and materials panel here inside Illustrator 2022 and moving forward. Now I'll show you how to edit an existing 3D effect. Good news. Everything 3D in Illustrator is entirely dynamic, meaning that you can modify the settings anytime you like. And so assuming that your object is selected, I'll go ahead and click on mine in order to make it so, and that your 3D and materials panel is up on screen, why then I could increase the depth of my extrusion effect just by dragging that slider bar right there. I could also take advantage of the widget, so I'll just go ahead and drag in the center in order to apply a freeform transformation like so. However, let's say your 3D and materials panel is not up on screen, and so I'll just go ahead and close that panel in order to simulate this effect. What you don't do is go to the effect menu, choose 3D and materials, and choose that extrude and bevel command once again. And that's because that would apply another heaping helping of that effect to the existing one. At which point, at least in this version of Illustrator, I see this alert message telling me that applying another instance of this effect is currently, I just want to highlight that word, currently not supported, thereby indicating that possibly Adobe is thinking of supporting this in the future. And so the question becomes, really, Illustrator, are you going to allow us in the future to take a 3D object and extrude it into 4D space in order to create a tesseract? Is that going to happen? I don't actually think so. It's a little hard to imagine such a thing, let alone actually pull it off. But in any event, here's what you actually do. A couple of different options available to you. One is to go to the window menu and choose 3D and materials to bring back that panel. So that works just fine. But this is a dynamic effect. So those of you who know Illustrator pretty well, think about it. You want to choose the appearance command in order to bring up the appearance panel wherever it may appear on your screen, at which point you'll see that dynamic effect 3D and materials. Click on that item and that will bring up the panel along with all of your existing settings. All right, so I'm going to make a few numerical modifications. I want you to see here that we have X, Y, and Z values. So you can actually modify those values if you want. And so for example, let's say I have some values in mind that I've applied before. I can reapply them just by double clicking in that X value, for example, and I'm going to change it to 170. But I want you to see, as I dial in each one of these numbers, I'm going to see it apply on screen. So don't worry about that. That's just Illustrator doing due diligence on the fly. Then I'll tab to the Y value, and I'll change it to -160. This is just what I came up with. And then I'll tab to the Z value and change it to 165 degrees. And now what I could do is just tab my way back to the depth value right there. And I'm going to change that guy to 150 points. By the way, I'm working in points for what that's worth. And I end up with this effect here. After which point, in order to accept the change, I'll press the Enter key. And that'll go ahead and shift focus back from the panel to the object itself. Now, that's not the only way to edit editable text that's set in 3D. You can, if you so desire, change that text. And so I'll just go ahead and double click on it. And notice that brings up my blinking insertion marker, and it switches me automatically to the type tool, at which point I'll just go ahead and highlight the U and change it to an O. And then to accept that change, I'll press the escape key. And that, my friends, is how you edit an existing 3D object. Let's now take a look at the bevel options, why don't we, which allow you to sculpt the fills and the strokes associated with a 3D object. My 3D object just happens to still be selected, and my 3D and materials panel is up on screen. So good so far. Now look at this bevel guy right here. You just want to go ahead and turn it on to assign the default bevel as well as expand these various values. Notice by default, the bevel shape is set to classic, so we have a straight drop off. And so where the O is concerned, for example, the blue fill, it basically sculpts upward, flattens out, and sculpts back downward. And this is true for all of the yellow strokes as well. And to see this a little better, I'm going to pitch the letters backward by rotating them around the X-axis. And now you can see how these edges actually sculpt outward. The strokes too. It's just amazing. In any event, we don't have a slope value measured in degrees. Instead, we have these width and height values that are measured in percentages. So if I want the effect to be narrower, I would take the width value down. If I want it to be thicker, which I do, I'd take the value up. You can also make the effect basically, well, negligible in my case, but make it not so tall. Or you can make it very, very tall indeed. So we have these Mount Everests in the middle of our various fills. All right, I'm going to take that value down a little bit. Now, notice the repeat value. By default, it's set to 1, so there is no repeat. Notice also the space value is dimmed. However, if I click in there and press the up arrow key, then I'm going to take that value up to 2 so that we have some stair stepping, and then 3, and then 4. So we've got a lot of steps at this point. At which point the space value is now available. And so you could decrease that value if you want to, like so, or you can increase the value so that the steps essentially begin to cross each other. All right, that's not what I want. I'll take the repeat value down to 1, let's say. And at this point, I am going to change the classic shape value to round, which is going to give us a kind of pillow effect. And to make that more obvious, I'll increase the height value, like so. So you can see that we have rounded edges. It's pretty obvious. Convex doesn't create a concave effect, by the way. Instead, what we get, that's the job, by the way, of bevel inside, as we'll see in a moment. Instead, we get these sculpted edges. They sculpt inward this time around, as you can see along the end. Also, we've got step. So we're going to basically create a flat edge, that is to say, then a vertical edge that's coming straight outward, and then another flat edge. And you also have these various outlines. You can play with them. But classic outline is going to give you a kind of pointy edge on the inside. Then it's going to flatten out, pointy edge on the outside, and so forth. All right. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to switch back to round so that you can see if you really want to create a concave effect so that the letters are sculpting inward, then you turn on bevel inside and you'll get this effect right here where we're hollowing out the letters. And that works with all the various shapes as well. So try it out if you're so inclined. I'm going to turn that off so I can turn on bevel both sides. And what that's going to do is not only bevel the front face, but the rear face as well, which we're not really seeing, but I bet we'll be able to see it just a little bit. I'll turn on bevel both sides, and you can see how they're coming out on the back. But what I'm going to do is just rotate these letters around. Actually, what is this? This is a yaw, as you may recall. And then I'll go ahead and pitch the letters forward a little bit. Actually, no, you know what I'll do, that is, I'll roll them. Why don't I try rolling them this time around the z-axis? All right, now you can see how these edges are coming outward. It's going to be even more obvious if I switch to the lighting tab up here at the top of the panel, and I'm going to change the rotation value, that is, to somewhere in the zone of negative 105 degrees is what I came up with. And I'm going to decrease the height value as well, let's say, and you can see the light play off of those rounded letters. All right, I don't want that anymore, so I'm just going to undo those changes by pressing Control Z or Command Z on the Mac as many times as it takes to undo all that junk I just applied. Switch back to the object panel. Notice that both of the checkboxes are now turned off, and I'm going to dial in some specific values. I'm going to change the width value to 80%, and then I'll tab to the height value and change it to 50%, like so that we have just a little bit of that pillow emboss. And then I'm going to tab my way down to the X value, which I can't see, and I didn't select anyway, so I'll just keep pressing the tab key. That didn't work at all, did it? All right, I'll just go ahead and triple click inside the X value and reinstate those values we had a moment ago. 170 degrees for X, negative 160 for Y, and then 165 for Z. And we end up with this lovely effect right here. All right, I just want you to see something. I'm going to hide the panel for a moment. Notice my appearance panel is up on screen. I want you to notice the difference. Look how we can just turn this effect off by clicking on that eyeball to make it go away. I want you to see a couple of things. First of all, notice that the original letters without the 3D effect applied, we have a very thick stroke, thick yellow stroke covering up the blue fill. So the 30-point yellow stroke is in front of the blue fill. But as soon as I turn that 3D and materials effect back on, the blue fill, things switch out. The blue fill is now sitting on top of the stroke. So that's just the way things work, at least currently inside Illustrator. Another thing to notice, I'll go ahead and turn that eyeball off once again so that you can see that the letters without the 3D effect applied are more or less centered on screen. Whereas as soon as I turn that 3D effect on, the letters are no longer centered. And that's just a function of the fact that we've rotated these letters in 3D space. And so they're basically pitching back and so forth. If you want to change things, then with the black arrow tool selected up here at the top of the toolbox, just press the Enter key in order to bring up the Move dialog box. And I'm going to change the horizontal value to 40, and then I'll change the vertical value to negative 20, like so. And that basically centers the text more or less on screen. We could argue about whether it's really completely centered, but let's not. Let's be friends by clicking OK. And that is how you apply a bevel effect to the fills and the strokes, just sculpting things all over the place with 3D here inside Illustrator 2022 and moving forward. Thank you all so much for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe. Now, 3D in Illustrator is pretty great, but it lacks wireframe, for example, which I'd sure like to see. Any other ideas? Comment them down below. If you're looking for more, check out my Patreon as well as my very own Deke.com. I'm Deke McClelland. This is Illustrator Now.